as I am to think about and talk about diverse topics in M&E. Before I kickstart and set the context for the webinar today, a few housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A channel. Panelists, please feel free to take questions directly from the channel if needed, if you think you can get to them on time. Otherwise, I will pick up some questions from and direct them to you. If for some reason there is a disruption in our telecast, in our panel, we will of course come back to it. And if there are questions that we are not able to take during the session, we would love to take them through email. So without much of a, without losing time, really very, very pleased to start this discussion on inclusivity in M&E. In the implementation of social programs, M&E carries a connotation of being management and donor-driven. This gives a sense of it being a top-down approach. And in today's session, we hope that we can think through what can be done to make M&E inclusive and adaptive. Inclusive in two senses. One, inclusive of project implementers, people who are designing the project, people who are implementing the project, as well as inclusive of participants of the project. We are going to discuss these questions in the light of 3I's Swashakt program, which I will describe briefly in a bit. Swashakt is pioneering an M&E system that allows the perspectives and the requirements of implementing organizations and project participants to be truly reflected and used. I'm joined today by 3 colleagues with extensive experience in M&E and research. Each will bring in their own unique perspective. So let me start by introducing Karthik Morchan, data scientist, Sri and Swashakt from LEAD at Kriya University. LEAD at Kriya University is our partner in the Swashakt evidence program. Karthik leads strategic data science initiatives and provides technical assistance to National Rural Livelihoods Mission under LEAD's STREE initiative. He has worked across multiple sectors, including MSME and entrepreneurship, digital financial services, inclusive finance, and public health. Welcome, Karthik. We have with us Madhu Khetan from Pradhan. Pradhan has been a close collaborator of 3I, and our paths have crossed many times. Madhu Khetan is integrator at Delhi-based Pradhan, overseeing programs, operations, and monitoring and evaluation. In her role, she also influences and supports the National Rural Livelihoods Mission on institution building for the 32,000 NRLM cluster level federations. I'm very pleased to have with us Professor Tara Nair from the Gujarat Institute of Development Research. GIDR is one of our partners in the Swashakt program on the evaluation front, and Tara will be able to bring in her unique perspective on monitoring as it stands and evaluation as it stands. Tara researches in policy and institutional development in pro-poor financial services, rural innovations, women and development, and livelihoods. She has also worked on the Faculty of Entrepreneurship Development Institute of India, EDII, Mudra Institute of Communications, Ahmedabad, MICA, and Institute of Rural Management, Anand. Welcome, Madhu and Tara. It's a great pleasure to have you here. The structure of today's webinar is, we will start off with a presentation by Karthik, followed by a discussion. I will be chairing the discussion. Before I hand it over to Karthik, let me briefly introduce the Swashakt programs in the context of which we are having this larger discussion on inclusivity and gender responsiveness. In this presentation, my intention is to walk you through the framework of measuring WEE and also what the Swashakt program tries to achieve. Swashakt, as the name suggests, means self-empowered in Hindi. It is one of our 3I's largest programs with an investment of 7.3 million USD from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The objective of the program is to generate evidence on what works, why, how, why, for whom, and at what costs for women's economic empowerment through women's collectives, in particular, women's collective enterprises. Why do we need to invest in women's collectives? There is no doubt about the fact that endowments, entitlements, and investments that women receive from the time that they are born and through their lifetime are not the same as men. This means that women are resource poor. Resources in terms of all forms of livelihood resources, whether they're human resources, whether they're physical capital, whether they're material assets, and productive assets. Supporting women-run and led businesses can give resource poor women ownership and agency over economic assets, which can lead to their economic empowerment. And within this vision of women's enterprises being a mechanism for women's economic empowerment, Swashakt focuses in particular on collective enterprises. The advantage of the collective is that it can alleviate some of the structural and systematic advantages that women's enterprises face. It has been pointed out through numerous studies as well as theory that women's enterprises face certain critical barriers and which are often stem from gender biases in the states, in the institutions, and in the markets. Collectivizing, bringing many women together can actually empower women to take collective action and collectively bargain with the markets. There are also some studies which have shown that group enterprises, collective enterprises, help women to share risk, reduce cost, and through resource pooling, build their market position vis-a-vis other players, increase their competitiveness. So on the economic side as well, there's a lot of theoretically collective enterprises can do a lot to alleviate the structural and systematic advantages that women's enterprises face. And of course, there are challenges as well. Problems of coordination have been pointed out many times over. And what we want to do in Swashakt is to understand more about women's collective enterprises. We are really, encouraged in this because there have been some good success stories of collective enterprises in India working for women, such as those by Seva, Pradhan, Kudumbashri, and SERP. Some of these are being, are being pushed by the private sector, some by the government. Overall, we view economic collectives or enterprise collectives as more of empowerment collectives, which alleviate the critical structural barriers and challenges that women's enterprises face. So what does Swashakt wish to do? And here we would like to speak a bit more about what's about the various projects that Swashakt supports. Um, there are 9 projects under Swashakt which aim to set up or replicate models of women's collective enterprises. Our projects are spread over 9 states in India: Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Bihar, Orissa, Jharkhand, West Bengal, and now we also have one in UP. Our projects are diverse, working with different
Vidisha,
types of
sorry
women.
to interrupt. The slides
Yeah.
are not moving, so you can just, if you can go to third slide.
Is this any better?
They're still seeing the title slide.
Okay. I think I should just stop sharing and then reshare maybe. Sorry about this. I don't know what's happening. But you know what? I could just continue if it helps, not wasting the time. Yeah.
Yeah, now we can see. Thanks, Pusha.
Yeah, so the kind of women's collectives that we are working with are various. We are working with producer companies and agro-based farmer producer companies, which are legal entities working under, registered under the Companies Act. We're also working with associations of producer groups. We are working with aggregations of various aggregation models of collectivizing women's individual enterprises. We're also working with aggregation models of SHGs. So the federation-led work that perhaps Madhu will be bringing up later in her in the conversation. So some of our projects are completely private sector led, while others are in participation in partnership with the government. All in all, a very diverse sector, diverse set of projects that we are supporting here with Swashakt. Let me now go on to very briefly talk about the framework in which we are trying to understand and measure women's economic empowerment. How do collectives figure in this in our thought process? We use the power definition of women's economic empowerment. And in this, there are broadly 4 dimensions of power that define, or power or agency that define empowerment. Power within, a woman's ability to build her capacity, her capabilities, knowledge, and self-esteem. Power 2, a woman's power to take economic decision, her agency within household and enterprises. Power over, the power of a woman, ability of a woman to access and control financial, material, and knowledge-based assets. Finally, and what really differentiates collectives from other models of empowerment is the power with, and which is very critical when you're working with resource poor women who are trying to get into the space, into a space which is male dominated, which is not something that they're used to, where their presence is not endemic, and where their presence would be truly transformative. Is power with, the power ability of women to organize with others to enhance economic activities and entitlements. Swashakt presents solutions for each of these 4 dimensions of economic empowerment. For power within, we are supporting our projects support technical and technology training, skill building exercises, and gender training. To intervene in the power two dimension, our projects focus, some of our projects focus on leadership trainings, entrepreneurial trainings, and soft skills to improve their bargaining power over. Here, we are supporting the setting up of common production units, providing access to group credit, market linkages, and digitization. And of course, power with, which is the base of Swashakt, through collectivization, partnerships, governance, and establishing a network of women entrepreneurs. Broadly, this is the framework that in which Swashakt works, on which the foundations of Swashakt. And I now invite Karthik to elaborate more on how the M&E system that we have developed speaks to this framework. Thank you so much. Karthik, over to you.
Thanks, Vidisha. I'll just share my screen. Just a moment. Yeah. So we lead at K University. We are the grant management partners with 3IE for the Swashakt project. And we are basically responsible for leading the monitoring efforts for all the project. And along with 3IE, we also look at the learnings component, which it's an integral part of our program. Before I go into my presentation, just lay the outline of what I'm going to talk. First, I'm going to discuss why Swashakt is a complex intervention. And then what was our approach for the overall MLE systems, and then what were our learnings from the field. To start with, why is Swashakt a complex program? So as Vidisha mentioned in a crisp way, so Swashakt is a portfolio of 9 different projects, and each project have their own set of interventions. And these interventions ranges from financial linkages, market linkages, digital solutions, capacity building. And each grantee, they have their own combination of these interventions. So that is one complexity. The other one is all of these projects are exclusively focused on women, which brings with it the challenges of understanding and addressing gender-based barriers in each of these projects. Just to explain the complexity, we're just given this infographic. So we have 9 implementing agencies in this project, and out of 9, 4 are 1-year projects, which are basically pilot projects, and 5 are 3-year projects. And these 9 projects are being implemented in 10 different states, which are spread across the country. And each state have their own socioeconomic norms that adds to the complexity. And Vidisha already mentioned, so we have 4 different types of collectives, FPCs, associations, SHGs, informal clusters. And even though our end beneficiaries are women, the occupation of this woman varies widely across the project. For example, we have farmers as part of our target beneficiaries. We have kirana store owners. We have bamboo artisans. We have craft artisans and textile weavers. And last most important point is that the interventions that these 9 projects have can be broadly classified into 7 types. But as I mentioned, some grantee will have, let's say, 4 of these interventions working for them. Some might have all 7. That's part of their programming plan. But important thing is the intensity of implementation that also varies across the project. Just to give an example, so capacity building is an important component, and under that, leadership development, especially for the collective members, it's informed across the grantees. Now, the capacity building program for one grantee is a 5-day duration training, and it has just 12 modules. It's a very detailed one. But the same capacity building training for another grantee is just for 2 days with 4 modules. So the content might be the same, but the intensity or the level of training that they receive, that varies across the project. So taking into consideration all these, it's really important to have an overall picture of the Swashakt project, keeping account all these complexities. So when we started the design phase of this particular project, we had to keep the following factors in mind during discussions. So we already know that I already mentioned we have multiple partners, components, objectives. The objectives are different for different projects. And also we have to think about whether we need to look at indicators at the Swashakt level because that's very important. We have to know how the project as overall is progressing, or we have to look at individual grant indicators, because these projects are widely, like, they're very diverse. So it's all important to look at grantee indicators so that we also get to understand how each grant is progressing and the learnings that they're generating from this. So, we have to do this trade-off between where we want to place our indicators, and also because it's a woman-based program, quality-based program. So we also need to make sure we add gender responsive indicators as part of the overall M&E framework. And also we need to understand the monitoring blind spots for each projects. To add to that, we also have to look at indicators that might be highly relevant for the program. But you need considerable effort in terms of time resource to collect the information. So we also have to do the trade-off, like whether it's really possible to collect this information based on the program. And also, we need to understand the pace of change for different indicators. Just to give an example, for a particular project, there might be indicators that can show progress very rapidly. And there might also be indicators that takes a long time to show progress. So instead of keeping our M&E framework to be very rigid, that all the indicators should be selected in a particular frequency, we wanted it to be flexible. Like we can have some indicators that are collect monthly, and if we think that some indicators will not show progress for a long time, we want to collect it once in 6 months. So we need to have this flexibility in our approach. And the last important point is that we need to also understand the capacity of individual grantees. So we have 9 different grantees. So we looked at each grantee's previous projects, how they implemented the M&E systems, and then also their data systems, whether they have dedicated M&E person in the team. So we had to look at all these factors before coming up with the overall plan for the monitoring. Now, I'll just briefly describe our approach. So we had 4 guiding principles when we designed our approach. So first is inclusive and participative. So when we say inclusive, we wanted to make sure the implementing partners are part of all the discussions right from the beginning. Not just, we just don't tell them you have to do this, we just hand over the monitoring sheet to them, but we want them to be part of the discussions right from the conception. And participative means we just didn't involve just the program lead of each of these projects. We made sure that the ground level workers in each of these projects, their M&E team, everybody's involved in all the discussion, so that we get ground level insights also. So that's important guiding principle that we had. And second, we wanted to be flexible. As mentioned earlier, we didn't want it to be a very rigid system. So in terms of what indicators should be collected, and whether any indicator can drop from the monitoring list, whether we want to add in new indicators in the later stage, we're very flexible about it. And we want to be gender responsive. We need to make sure we have gender related indicators in both levels, individual and enterprise level. And then learning. In any traditional M&E system, the learning comes as the last stage of the overall approach. So we have the design, then we have the monitoring phase where we collect program data on a continuous process, and then we have the evaluation at the end of the program. And once the evaluation is completed, so we get the learnings from the evaluation and then do a program review and feedback. But what we thought was that because it's a portfolio project, it's not a simple linear project. So we have a portfolio of projects have their own local factors involved. So we want the learning to be a continuous process, not just a one-time thing. So that was the 4th guiding principle that we had. So as you can see in the infographic, so the beneficiaries were at the center of our approach. So in the design phase, we designed the MLE systems that needed to be set up. And also we had, so we also have impact evaluations for each of these projects. That was also separately set up, which 3I is leading. And then we considered monitoring and learning as a single component. It was not treated as a separate component. So on a regular basis, almost every month, so we had this monitoring and learning sessions with all of the grantees, which was really important for the project. And of course, we have the program and process evaluations. For the pilot projects, we have formative evaluation. And for TA projects, we have a detailed program evaluation based on inline, with baseline inline. And then, so once we integrate all of these components, so we want to develop a feedback system. And also, we need to understand the feasibility and the scale up and sustainability of these projects. That's an important component for us. So just moving on. So I've just described a bit of a design phase. What do we do in the design phase? I think that's an important component and learning for us. So in the design stage, what we initially did was 3I team and lead team. So we developed a draft theory of change for the entire the overall Swashakt program based on our understanding and looking at the proposals of the different grantees. So we developed a draft theory of change. But in order to develop the M&E system, like the indicators for monitoring and evaluation, we adopted a consultative process. So what we did was we held a workshop with all the grantees in place. And from the grantees, we had the program leads attending the workshop. We had the program manager attending the workshop, and we also made sure that we had the ground level workers from all of these projects. They are the field executives that are actually on the ground interacting with the women. We made sure they are all part of this particular workshop. And if I go to next screen, so this is the exercise that we did with all of the grantees. I'm sorry for the clarity here, but I will just explain it. So what we did was the TOC that we developed at 4 key pathways. So we divide the group into divide the participants into 4 different groups, and we gave one pathway for each of these parts, one of each of these groups. So what we did was, you see the top left corner. So we gave them the activity, the blue boxes. We gave them the inputs, and we gave them the activities, and we didn't give them the outcomes or outputs that we envisaged. What we told them was, okay, so this is the inputs and this is the activity, and what do you think are the relevant outputs and outcomes that will come out of it? So if you see here, the participants, they entered their inputs here in terms of what outputs and outcomes they think are relevant. And after that exercise, what we did was, we arranged all these outputs and outcomes in a horizontal way. And then we asked them, okay, for each of these outputs and outcome, what are the relevant indicators that you think we can measure? And so this is, you can see they've listed the indicators here. I'll just give a close-up view here. For example, you can see that these are 3 outputs they mentioned. And these are the indicators that they told, that is relevant under each of these. And as a third and key step, what we did was, we asked them to assess each of the indicators based on 2 parameters. One is the level of importance, and then the feasibility in terms of cost and time. So we can see here, they're given a star for feasibility, level of importance, and they're given a rupee symbol for the feasibility. So based on this exercise, what we did was, we came up with a long list of indicators, and we clubbed them into, let's say, these are the indicators that are highly important and feasible also. And then these are indicators that's like either feasible or highly important. And these are indicators that participants think that it's not relevant nor it's feasible. So this was the kind of a participant approach we took, and we placed. So it was largely driven by the implementers. It was not driven by us. We didn't give them the entire TOC. It was largely driven by them, and this also gave them a sense of ownership. Like, okay, they were part of the process. They identified indicators. Now they felt that responsibility to collect this data and see how the program is progressing. And so once we finalized the indicators for each of these grantees, so we set up a frequency, because for 1A projects, we set a frequency of once in a month, they should report the indicators. And for 3A projects, it was a quarterly basis. And I'll explain the approach in the latest slides. We have that in the latest slides. Yeah. And so that was our approach for the design phase. Now comes to the monitoring and evaluation phase. What was our approach? So the first was to decide what all should be the indicators, right? Whether it should be program level or project level indicators. So that was a huge trade-off for us. We had lots of deliberations on that, whether we need lots of information at the Swashakt level or we need a lot of information at the project level. So it's kind of a trade-off, right? Because we need to know the entire how the program is progressing, and we want to do reporting to the donor, and we also need to generate learnings for the implementers. So what we did was, using the workshop that I described earlier. So we came up with a set of common indicators, that were common across all the 9 grantees based on their proposal, and we made sure these common indicators we collect on a regular basis, so that we have the information about the overall program. And also we had a set of project specific indicators, because a project focusing on, let's say, textile weavers, they will have completely different indicators, because they will have dyeing unit indicator related to, let's say, CFCs, opposing to a project focusing on, let's say, food processing. So that will have completely different set of indicators. So we had both program common indicators, and we also project level indicators that are very specific to the programs, and we made sure that they are as minimal as possible. So we because we didn't want the implementers to spend lots of efforts on collecting information, like new data mechanisms, right? They just want them to use the existing ones to collect this information. And the next is co-developing the monitoring framework. At the beginning of the project, we held lots of iterations with the grantees. So we told them that, okay, based on the conception workshop, these are the indicators that we feel that are relevant for the Swashakt program and for your project. Now, what do you think? And in these iterations, we had lots of inputs from them. They told that, okay, you can add these indicators also because we think they're relevant for us and we can capture it easily. So based on these interactions, we're able to also build, as I mentioned, the sense of ownership among the grantees, because they led the discussions and like the suggestions were the core part of the framework. They felt the sense of ownership and responsibility to collect and report information on a timely manner. Next is capacity building of grantees. So this is something that really important for our program. At the beginning, right, in the starting, we had almost weekly interactions with the like M&E point person. One of the reasons being that we also include some complex indicators as part of the monitoring framework. For example, let's say individual woman level income. That's an important indicator. Like how to collect this information, right? We also have to build the capacity on these levels also. Like what kind of data mechanism will be relevant for a indicator like household income, which itself is a very complex indicator, and people also struggle this in like collecting this information evaluation stage, right? Like even proper researchers struggle to collect this information. Now, if we expect to collect this data from a program person, then we have to be very to the point, and it should be this mechanism should be as simple as possible. So that's something that we made sure. Then we made sure we kept in touch with them. It's not that they just collect the data and they send us an email and then we just compile it and keep it in outside. So every month when they share the data, we review it, and within a week, like both 3A team and lead team will have a call with them, and the call will be directed by the monitoring indicators. So whatever progress I've reported, it's more about if they, for example, if the particular indicator is there and they achieve the target, we try to understand how did you achieve the target, like what were the drivers, what were the enabling factors, and if there's any indicator that they're lagging behind, then we try to understand like what are the bottlenecks that we're facing, and there was also scope to change the indicator frequency also. For example, if they felt that okay, this indicator we don't think will move very fast, we won't change it from monthly to quarterly. So we had that flexibility also in terms of our understanding. And the last point was that the monitoring data was like a feed to the evaluation that we're doing for the 1 year projects that we have. Because we had monitoring data for almost 11-12 months, we used it as a basis for the entire design of the formative evaluation, like because we had understanding about how the program has progressed. So in a formative evaluation, we'll be able to focus on like if a particular indicator is not progressing well, then we focused on the understanding the what are the barriers for that, right? It was more of the like it fed into the formative evaluation, and also for the impact evaluation, the entire design was co-developed with the implementing agencies. It's not that we developed the like 3A developed the evaluation design. It was co-developed with the implementing partners, and the inputs were crucial to it in terms of selecting the sample villages, the sample respondents. So the inputs were critical to it, and it was more of a participative process. Next is our learning approach. I'll just broadly describe it. So we had 3 broad-based approach. So one is the progress reports. So as we know that every grantee has to report the progress on based on the payment schedule. So in the progress report, like we didn't ask just for the numbers, like how much they progress. We also had a section dedicated to learning and review. For example, they should also tell us what are challenges they face in implementation, and then how do they overcome it. So based on these sections, we understood that okay, this is a challenge they're facing, and we were able to understand in which way we can facilitate from our end. Like if we thought that okay, for example, there's a challenge here, and we can bring in some third party who can support them in that, who's our other partner. So we were able to do these connections and help the grantees. And second is the like it's an important and innovative thing, I feel. So we had this peer learning events on a quarterly basis, and we also have a dedicated WhatsApp platform for everybody to discuss. So in the peer learning event, it's more of reflecting and sharing each other's challenges, achievements, and learnings. And we also had key experts to come into this peer learning sessions and talk about some topics relevant to the project. For example, one of the topic was like understanding unit economics of collective enterprises. That's something that our implementers greatly appreciated, because they didn't have that understanding before. And also because it was COVID time, because we also require COVID specific strategies, right, in terms of how to overcome the challenges. So it was also greatly helpful to have these interactions with them. And it was also option to connect bilaterally, like different countries can connect with each other separately based on the discussions. And also and the last approach was how to communicate the learnings to the external world, to the broader research community. So we had a dedicated Medium page for this project, and we have a monthly digest with the key learnings from each of this project. And we also had published some blogs on the program implementation side. You can see here, right? So one blog was on this was from one of the food processing project, like why Makana production is a good fit for a culture-based model. So it's a Bihar-based project. So we also came up with knowledge products for the external community also. Now, so based on our last 1.5 year, 2 years experience, we want to share, like while implementing our particular approach, what are the lessons we learned from this, which will be very useful for the broader research community. So first is participative processes must be inclusive. So as we mentioned, like involving all stakeholders, including ground level workers, in every stage of the project, not just at the operation side, right? Involving them in all the stages, it greatly increases the ownership and motivation of the implementers. Because of this process, we feel that they're also very open to us in terms of the challenges that they face. Like they in every call, they always come to us for our inputs, like, okay, this is challenge we're facing, how we can overcome it. I think it has greatly increased their participation and ownership. And as I mentioned, with grantees leading the discussion on monitoring sheets, they kind of feel responsible to make sure the data is of high quality and relevant for them. And then another important point is that we wanted to build their capacity, but also we didn't want to like burden them with extra work, right? So understanding what's the minimum data that's required for both Swashakt level as well as project level, and make sure we have a lean set of indicators. It was very critical for us. Like if we give them a list of 50 indicators, because the more data we have, the more merry we are, right? Like we can do lots of analysis with that. But understanding what's the minimum requirement, that not burden the grantee. I think that's an important lesson that we learned. And making sure, for example, for the complex indicators, making sure we have some innovative mechanisms to collect those data. It has greatly helped us under getting timely and accurate data. And third learning was that importance of feedback loops. Look, regular check-ins with the grantees helped us in setting up the cadence and detection mechanisms for different types of indicators. Just to give an example, right? So as I mentioned, even though we had a very minimum set of indicators, we also include some outcome level indicators as part of the program, which I will describe briefly later. But one of the indicators is income indicator. Now, like collecting income information from all the beneficiaries will lead data quality issues, because first it's self-reported, second it's collected by a program level team, right? So what we do is we did a very innovative methodology where we kind of select a subset of respondents. We helped, like we didn't do it, it was done by the implementing team, but we helped them to select a subset of beneficiaries who will be representative of the project, right? And we try to collect data from them. So this reduced the burden quite a bit, and it also made sure we got consistent and quality data from them. And data triangulation, yeah, this is a very important point. Like for the key indicators, we try to set up data triangulation mechanism within the monitoring framework. This really helped us to make sure we had quality data on important indicators. For example, income data. We made sure that we had indicators on income at the individual woman level, and also the enterprise level. So because we know how many beneficiaries there are the enterprises, we're able to triangulate the data, and initially we were able to troubleshoot it, right? Like if there's any kind of mismatch between the two data, we're able to diagnose it, like why it is there, like in terms of calculation. We were able to diagnose it initially, and we be able to come up with quality data thereafter. Then regular monitoring data helps in Gandhi's cross learning. So as I mentioned, the interventions are similar across the projects, but the mechanism with which they implemented are quite different. The mechanism that they use, right? Uh, just to give an example, so we have three projects that are based on food processing, and as we know that food processing is a seasonal program. Like whenever the farming season is there, we will get the raw materials, and then we do food processing, right? So the income is seasonal for the beneficiaries. That's well known fact. But what we learned from our monitoring data, because we collected income data for women, right? Um, One of the indicators that we collecting was wages, like how many women got wages from the particular enterprise. So in one of the project that we discussed, because a food processing enterprise might have a maximum of 5 to 7 employees. So let's say there are 100 beneficiaries who are part of the program. Only 5 to 7 beneficiaries can become an employee of an enterprise because it's a small scale enterprise, right? So what one of our grants did was they made sure the beneficiaries are employed on a rotational basis. Like the trained like let's say 100 people, they divided them into 20, 20, 25 groups. They trained them on different aspects of the enterprise, the technical aspects of the enterprise. They made sure they had a roster, so that it made sure that all the women had an opportunity to collect like extra income through working in the enterprise, and it kept the moral of the entire team also. It's not that only 5 to 10 people got selected and others don't have that extra income. So this was a great learning for us. So we knew that income was seasonal, but this particular intervention that they had, that was quite innovative, and it was really effective for them. And we were able to communicate this to the other two grantees also. So we told that, okay, look, this is what the other grantee is doing. Like, do you have any similar design in your mind? So that helped them to think in that aspect, and they had some plans for that, but this helped them to understand how it's actually being implemented, and they were able to come up with their own plans for that also. So it greatly has increased, like improved cost earning, because it was the data collected regularly, and we had regular communications with them. And then, as mentioned, frequent interactions helps in course correction, because the first year of the project was during the peak of the COVID pandemic. So we had lots of improvement challenges. So some of the program was paused for as long as like 2 to 3 months. So it was important for us to gather monitoring data to understand like how the programs are processing, and it helped us in doing some course corrections also. For example, it helped us reprioritize the activities. For example, if some of the activity was slated towards the end of the program, and if it can be done during the COVID pandemic, right? Because it doesn't involve field work, we're able to reprioritize those activities in the COVID time, so that we're able to keep that field team occupied with the work. We're able to do progress in the intervention. And also, as I mentioned, in one of the projects that we had, the grantee was able to achieve the target in terms of number of people reached in a very short manner. So we were able to discuss with them, and because we had lots of time, we were able to increase the target for number of people to be reached. So this has helped in a lot for us in course correction activities. And next is building an evidence portfolio for the grantees. So as I mentioned earlier, right, the data systems of grantees and their like having a portfolio of them is really important. So because this monitoring system that we developed with us was driven by grantees, they're able to understand quite a bit about which data to be collected, which is relevant for them also. And they were able to use the monitoring data to present their work in a very impactful way. Not just sharing pictures of training, but they also had numbers there with them. So that kind of helped them have this portfolio of evidence with them. And also having data systems in place. So it's not very high-fi, because ours was totally excellent Google Sheet based, because we wanted to make sure it's easy to implement, not just a fancy dashboard system. But it has helped them to understand like what kind of data systems to maintain to at least have the required information. I think it has helped them in a great way in that manner. And last was staying connected through peer learning events. I think that played a crucial role in our project, because people, the women agents felt connected to the Swashakt program. And also they felt connected to each other, right? Because they share challenges with each other, share their achievements with each other. They kind of formed a bonding among all the implementing agencies. And if you can look up at a WhatsApp group, it was like we see updates on a daily basis. So there's lots of discussion on a very daily basis. So as we know, in any WhatsApp groups, it will be very active in the first 1 month, and then we just have messages here and there. But in our case, because it's totally interactive, like till now it has been very active, and that built the team, the entire team bonding for the entire Swashakt project. Just to summarize, to be frank, it has not been a very easy journey for us. One of the biggest issues was, of course, the COVID pandemic. And we also had some hiccups in the beginning in terms of data quality and, timeliness and everything. But, we were able to, through the feedback and regular interaction, we were able to overcome the challenges. And we are really excited about the learnings that we're generating, both for the implementing agencies, so that they can show the impact and they can improve the impact, but also for the broader research community in terms of bringing the evidence of what works for human collectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik, for the excellent presentation and very thorough one. It has spurred a lot of questions and many discussion points. But I'll let you take a breather now. You've spoken for a bit, so my next questions are actually directed for Tara and Madhu. Tara, could we have your video on, please? Thank you so much. Tara and Madhu, you have been involved in M&E for decades now. And what has been your experience with participatory M&E? As things stand, who uses M&E and who benefits the most from M&E? Madhu, would you like to go first?
Okay, thanks, Vidisha. And before I respond to your question, and thank you so much for your presentation as well as Karthik's presentation. I think particularly in your presentation, I think that slide which in just one snapshot, summarized the entire framework and mapping it with the activities was really enlightening. And Karthik, thank you so much for that, sharing. Yeah, so Vidisha, to respond to what you asked, I mean, I've been in Pradhan involved with the M&E data collection for the last 5 years. So we've, just to very briefly, share about that, we've developed a methodology which uses, women data collectors from the community to collect data on the program interventions directly from the, participants of the program. So, and very complex data also, for example, on household incomes, practice adoption and knowledge is also being collected by the local women through the tablets. So this itself, I think, has been quite, something which has really helped the organization to look at and build a familiarity with data in large numbers, doing, things like, sampling, etc. Because otherwise, we were kind of dependent upon, perspectives which differed from team to team because, we have to, basically a team level kind of a function. So, so in my own experience, responding to your second part of your question, I mean, generally we've seen data is used even within Pradhan or, even though so much of data is available and which, you can filter and go right down to an individual woman to, SHG, village level, what's happening at the block level, etc. I mean, still we've seen, mostly, the predominant use of the data is mostly for external purposes. So I think in our case, the stakeholders who support the work and for whom data is probably, the only regular way to keep in touch with what is happening because they're not part of the same, geography. So, and I can completely, relate with that. I mean, we So, I mean, and I don't have any, I don't have a quarrel or this thing with that. So data will, of course, be, most relevant for people who are kind of, who don't have any other means of, getting to know what's happening. So in Pradhan, we did have a strong desire for the teams to also use whatever information is getting generated for informing the work that they do with communities or for use by the communities themselves. Our experience has been that for professionals in the teams who have access to the rich complexity of direct feedback from the communities, there is a merit in getting overall data for their entire set of villages that they may be responsible for. There is that kind of so I see that there is a balance. One is data generated through a scientific systematic process, which is then matched by the professionals with the kind of direct feedback from the communities and observations that they have, which is always which I think is very difficult to be captured by any M&E system, however agile it may be. So yeah, so I think and there's lots of discussion within Pradhan as to how can we make professionals and so when it comes to I think communities using, then I think the entire design needs to be very, very different from what we currently have. It needs both the design needs to be different as well as the granularity of the sampling process, the language, the vocabulary, and the feedback process, etc. All of that is a huge piece of work. And this is not to say that we are kind of saying that it is not possible, but it just requires that amount of effort and commensurate with the amount of investments which are available. So I think I'll pause here.
Thank you, Madhu, and also thank you for sharing the fact that data is being used by people who have no other. I really like the way you put it across, that the data is being used by people who don't have other means to understand what's going on with the community. In what you've said, I actually see a very, very strong recommendation for mixing different methods of data collection and data analysis. Tara, would you like to add to Madhu's observations?
Yeah, thanks, Vidisha, and thanks, Karthik, for that. That extensive. It was a thesis in its own right in terms of how to really do MLE exercises. That was really nice. And I must, start by saying that within this particular program, as someone who is accompanying a pilot project, which is not, with a very short window. I really felt, tremendous amount of freedom in terms of, sort of creatively using, a whole lot of sort of methods in terms of understanding what has been really unfolding over those many months. And, it was very important, or it's rather important to understand that this was a pilot project on the one hand, and it was being implemented in one of those relatively disadvantaged regions within Gujarat with its own associated problems. But the implementing agency, Anandi, has been working there for a very long time. So these are the kind of initial understandings with which I started approaching, that kind of the intervention. And I would start by saying that a pilot project of this nature, if you really need to design a monitoring and learning approach, then the indicators have to evolve on the go. They have to very discursively, develop in interaction with multiple stakeholders, because the stakeholders also sort of were changing as the program was evolving. So it was in that sense, I think what Karthik was mentioning at the programmatic level, the challenges happened. I think we sort of faced it at the level of the project because of the uncertainties. And uncertainty, as he very rightly said, largely also caused by the pandemic sort of disturbing everything. And in fact, the intervention had to start with business activity because the inception coincided with the NTFP collection period and things like that. So a lot of things, were sort of happening in slightly unpredictable sort of a fashion. So, but right at the beginning, our understanding, the research team's understanding was that we should exercise our sensitive understanding of the context of implementation, the intervention of that program, so that we can understand the sources and locations of power. That was extremely important for us because, right at the beginning, that we were very conscious of the fact that there should be ways to look for to make the process participatory. Let me explain it a little more, maybe a little more clearly. At the inception of this project, I think we observed that the project's dominant voices were the people who knew things, the external consultant who knew about NTFP enterprise, the management, the senior leadership who knew about, what the economics is going to be, what the market somewhat is, and things like that. So, the participants, like the community, members, the women who are members of the sangatans, they had a fairly passive sort of participation at that level. So we did a lot of things. We had a kind of a WhatsApp group which was used as a troubleshooting platform, which was also a kind of a place where a lot of managerial discussions happened, and people really sort of vent out their anxieties and like their fears and things like that. So we did a content analysis of those discussions just to understand how the big thought about this project is really going. So it started with actually the big questions, what technology to use, how much to produce, and how do we really understand the sort of, the crop diversification or the product diversification? How do you structure the product portfolio? Then it slowly came down to things like, how do we increase, kind of build our capacities? How do women sort of, get trained in this particular animal called farmer producer organization, which they just did not know? What are the regulatory constraints about, these things? So it really told us where the whole, the discourse about this particular intervention is really shaping. And then we started noticing, I'm actually talking about the participation and the difficulty in, mapping that participation. When the organization got formed, and when the women were sort of selected to become the members of the board, and they started meeting as board members, and we realized that actually the questions were changing. So the milestones were actually changing. The goalposts were shifting. They said, we are not bothered about buying huge technical devices. We don't think we can handle it. So no de-seeding of tamarind, and no cracking machine for mahua and things like that. We are actually going to kind of now focus on mobilization of women. We need more members, and we need to really strengthen our collection centers. We need to train them. We must get the right price for our product. So it was very interesting how the women were taking control over the process, and they completely sort of sidelined all those so-called experts goals and goalposts. I think that was I think at that level we decided that we are definitely going to document this aspect of the evolution of this enterprise, because for us it was extremely important to look at. Of course, I must mention at this point in time that some of the monitoring indicators development sort of meetings we had with 3IU were very useful. I think we had questions about whether this can be really, food security can be really sort of captured through a one-off survey, and what kind of answers we can expect and things like that. So that was definitely more participative and things like that. So the the whole the lesson, or the real learning from this project for us is defining participation in in a more proactive fashion, rather than having a mechanical kind of integration of different stakeholders into asking them, okay, what we should do. So I think that's where the organization, now the enterprise stands. It has really not been able to perhaps achieve all that it promised, partly because of pandemic and partly because of the pace of development of the business per se. But they learned a lot over the years, and they really learned the women of Dahod and Panchmahals are creating a product for the state of Kerala, a very sophisticated product, which I think is an extremely important indicator of what the project could really achieve. I somehow tend to feel that the term M&E doesn't really mean much with the core participants of a program, because I think that somehow comes as a kind of a monitoring and evaluation comes as a feeling of fear, because that means that the grant giver is looking at some of our performance indicators and things like that. I think those indicators must be integrated within the planning, scheduling processes and the review process of what these kinds of enterprises really do. And when they review, I think this we have seen happening in the meetings, where the women have learned how to plan the production scheduling, how the collection, all that by their own sort of contribution and their own logic. It's not that someone really went and told them high funda theories about how business scheduling happens. It's just because of using the native, ingenious logic of how we can really plan certain activities. So that's something which I thought we should perhaps sort of, call it by something else when we deal with, because, the program management generally moves around with the M&E sheet and saying that, okay, this cell is not done and this cell is not done. So that perhaps is not very healthy is what I was thinking. None of these exercises we have used M&E as a term at all. We have actually used the term review. Whenever we met them in multiple formats. We had review surveys done. We had, smaller group meetings with the BODs and community members and community resource persons. So we never used the term that we have come to evaluate or monitor. We said that let's review, what's really happening and where are we going. So, so that's the initial thoughts that I really have. Yeah.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you for actually highlighting this really nice. In summary, I felt we are all talking about the tyranny of M&E. We should have called our session that, but we have to give it a positive spin. That's actually not what M&E is, of course, meant to be. What struck me, Tara, and as you rightly mentioned, is what about the voices of the women who are project participants? And, how do we bring them into systems that are also relevant for monitoring the performance of their enterprises? You pointed out a very nice example that you gave was how the questions about how to measure the goalpost for the collective itself changed as women got more and more involved. Karthik, I would actually like for you to reflect a bit on this. We really collected extensive. We want to collect extensive data on women's economic empowerment, and here I want to separate out, the evaluation data and the monitoring and the M&E data. The evaluation data, definitely, we have, evaluations associated, mixed method evaluations associated with each of these projects. And some of them use experimental methods, some of them use qualitative, rigorous qualitative methods to understand on the various domains of women's economic empowerment. And that, of course, for that, the methodology is involving FGDs, surveys, so on, and it takes a lot of time of women's time. It certainly can't be done at a very regular frequency. It's done at the baseline, done at the end line. Monitoring data, on the other hand, is high frequency, right? And that has to feed on a regular basis if it has to be useful. And knowing that that women's economic empowerment is complex and it is best captured through intensive and detailed interviews with women, how have you sought to bring the voice of women project participants to reflect in the MNE systems, the high frequency data that we are using to track project effectiveness and implementation?
Yeah, thanks, Vidisha. So initially, when we were developing the framework for the monitoring, so we had this set of process indicators, that are standard across all the projects, like program reach, number of trainings held, number of people who attend the training, the effectiveness of the training. But we also felt that, we needed a set of outcome indicators, we can call them complex indicators, to be part of the monitoring framework. One of the reasons being, as Vidisha mentioned, right, knowing the outcome of the project after the project is completed, let's say 3 months of the project completed, it's not really going to help the implementing agency in terms of any form of course correction. So what we decided was that we will have a set of outcome indicators. We call them complex indicators in our project as part of the monitoring framework. And we will ask the grantees to collect the data. So we knew the caveats and related problems with the data. For example, the data will be self-reported by the women beneficiaries. I know that's the case in the evaluation also. But evaluation the service conducted by trained researchers. But here the data will collect by program people who have little or no experience of doing a survey. So there may have issues of how they ask the questions, right? So we knew all these caveats, and it's also physically impossible for the grantees. Let's say a project has 900 beneficiaries. It's physically impossible for them to reach to 900 beneficiaries asking them about the income in the last 1 month or any other outcome-related questions. So we had to come up with some innovative plan, like we do in evaluations, right? We select a sample of the respondents, which is representative. So we also came up with a plan, that for each grantee, we select a subset of the beneficiaries in a very rigorous way, but it's very simple for them to implement. It's not that it's totally very complicated, but it was very rigorous, like more of a systematic sampling process. So what we did was, so we had calls with all of the grantees, and we handled them like how to select a representative sample from their database, right? Let's say they had 900 beneficiaries, how to select only 90 beneficiaries out of them, like because these beneficiaries come from, let's say, 50 villages, and they have different socioeconomic background. So we just trained them how to collect this data from 90 of people on a regular basis, so that we'll have this information. Now with this, the challenges were that we needed to make sure. So what we did was, we kept the cohort same across all the months. So it's not that every month they collect information from 90 different beneficiaries. We wanted to keep the cohort same because we wanted to see the trend, like how it's changing over time. And also we kind of build that sensitiveness in the grantees. For example, if you're asking a woman about her income, so we had basically two important outcome indicators. One is income, and second is income resilience. So income resilience is more of food security and indebtedness questions, because that were relevant because it was COVID pandemic, and we also wanted to make sure that we capture the income loss due to COVID pandemic. So that's why we had income resilience questions. So we build the sensitiveness into the grantees. Like for example, let's say a woman come for a monthly meeting, right? So you just can't ask in front of everybody. Let's say we can't ask a woman like, what was your income the last month, right? It's very sensitive question, and it's very personal also. So we trained all the all the grantees on, like, they should have the woman in a separate room, and the way they should administer. So we had these 5 indicators, and we also train them on how to administer these questions in a very sensitive and very also in a research oriented way, and made sure that we had information for all these indicators from them. So this helped in 2 ways. One is that it helped us as grant management partners and donors to understand how the critical outcome indicators are performing on a regular basis, right? We didn't have to wait till the end of the program. For example, in one of the program, we were seeing that there was not consistent increase in the initial few months, and in terms of income for the woman. So we were able to troubleshoot, like understand what was the reason, like why it's happening, and we will troubleshoot and do some course corrections. So it was really helpful for us in terms of program implementation. And also on the second and the most important point was the implementers were able to talk to the beneficiaries directly and understand their state also, right? I know they interact with them on monthly meetings and all those things, but this is more of a I'm not a personal connection, but understanding their livelihood status also. I think that also helped them in a great way to understand like what's actually important impact they're generating, right? Because these are the women forum like they're supporting to this thing. I think it kind of helped them also in that manner. So I think if as Madhu mentioned, right, like we can't call it an M&E for like if you're working at the ground level. So we need to, I think we need to develop this kind of mechanisms which will help the implementing agencies collect like outcome level data and interact more with the women, so that we don't have to like wait till at the end of the program to see what actually is happening. I think that's an important learning from our project here, Vidisha.
Thank you, Karthik, and also for in that response, bringing out the importance of building capacities of implementing partners who are not who may not always be equipped with an independent M&E team, with a separate M&E team, but to be able to work with them and to build their capacity to collect, use, and understand data is a point that's very relevant. I have a question which is for Tara and Madhu, and we have heard that how the M&E is still so much and it's a mandate, it's a grant requirement, but how can we move to a more demand-led approach that prioritizes using findings to inform strategy and policy formulation while also ensuring accountability? What do you think would help to move in a direction where M&E is demand driven, and do we want necessarily to be there? Because like you said, there are benchmarks that are set, which are there are benchmarks that are set which are against performance indicators. You tick these boxes, and if you've ticked all the boxes, then the project was a success. But the ground reality might be completely different. So I would really like to hear from you, Madhu and Tara, about this. Perhaps we can start with Madhu. You've been quiet for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Vidisha. So I think, one is that, the perspective largely is, the most of the effort is around, to account for results and not so much on using the results for way forward. So I think that needs to shift. And I do see some, I do see that this is happening to a certain extent, early days probably, but I think there has to be a concerted effort in this direction by all stakeholders. And I think, I think as policymakers, they need to be more data driven and evidence focused in the formulation of public programs. So I think I was reading a interesting paper, I think a few days ago, and it assumes, that all these efforts and this discussion that we are also doing, it kind of assumes that people are rational in, meaning that, but this data is like one part of the driver to decision making. There are many other drivers also. So people are also not always, so I think, and rather than so expecting, I think it needs to be, all of us need to be more appreciative. And as CSOs also, I think CSOs, we need to be more appreciative of, role of evidence in evolving our own programs as well. Many times, I think we also tend to, not learn from existing efforts, and also discounting, evidence on the basis of, oh, that this is different and where we are working is different, etc. So things like that. So I think there has to be an overall societal focus also on scientific inquiry and temperament, which, as I think civil society organizations, we too tend to need to demonstrate in our work and our functioning. That's how I think, I hope things will change.
Thank you, Madhu. Tara?
It's somewhere, somewhat difficult to perhaps, decisively answer that question. But let me tell you that maybe there definitely, there are, let me put it this way. Simplifying everything so that, it's easy and comprehensible would also take out the complexity of the real world. But making it very complex would perhaps make the exercise extremely chaotic. Like there are challenges on both sides. So one thing I have, observed was that we have this very compelling sort of a tendency to simplify the complex realities through kind of, common indicators. And, we are looking for some ways of sort of homogenizing and standardizing the environment so that it's easy, it's amenable to better analysis and, more sharper analysis and things like that. I think that is something which must be guarded sort of against. At the same time, when I say that it's important to account for the contextual realities, and I am very clear as to what I'm saying, and I really know what kind of complexities that can really lead to. But I have a feeling that contexts are important. In fact, the context shape outcomes. So we cannot, completely sort of, decimate the effect and influence of distinct contexts on what the outcomes, that they are going to produce. So let me just take the example of this region that we have been asked to kind of, monitor the work of Anandi on. That is the Dahod Panchmahal's district, and that is in terms of all kinds of any indicator that you take, that is the most disadvantaged geography within otherwise so-called progressive Gujarat. So it's a very kind of low road sort of a development that you find in there, and a large part of that region kind of sustains on a subsistence kind of economic kind of life, and women are predominant partners or participants in that subsistence economy. Then like if you look at the vegetable cultivation or the compost making, the women do, they are largely sort of sharing it among themselves, and they're not really so familiar with the market, and they've not really experienced market in that sense, like selling. If they have 2 bags of vermicompost, they actually use one and give the other to the neighbors. So that's a kind of a ethos in which maybe many of those communities, tribal communities, are in the forest fringe communities are living in that region. So when we introduce income as an indicator, or we introduce returns from the market as an indicator, as a direct indicator, I have a feeling that we are somehow not able to capture the reality of this, this dynamics. Suppose we ask them that, how much of, vermicompost has been exchanged for, maybe something else from your, your neighbor, or how much has been used in your own, farm, so that your productivity has enhanced. So generally, we don't really get to capture these things through an M&E framework. We will do it as part of process documents, and we will perhaps even sort of monetize and value that and then put it there and things like that. But somehow, the mainstream sort of M&E frameworks would not allow this level of, reflecting context. But I think to me that's a very significant kind of aspect which shapes and influences the kind of outcomes of interventions. And I'm not saying anything new. I think all of us, the practitioners and the researchers here are very familiar with that concept. But my question is whether our frameworks really acknowledge and try to kind of accommodate that kind of a dynamics which certain economies would sort of display. So that's one of the questions I have in this this context, like whether the structured frameworks can, to what extent, can capture the complexity of the real world situation.
Yeah, it is certainly something to think about. In terms of and again, something that requires deep reflection on all our parts. To understand how we can have a model, a framework that also adapts to changing circumstances, and that is something that has to be built in the framework itself. I will now move on to questions which are there in the chat box, and I actually see a hand raised. So, Dr. Olaide Taiwo, would you please share your question? You have your hand up. I also request all panelists to look into the Q&A box if there are any questions that I will also be reading them up. But yeah, Dr. Taiwo, do you want to ask your question now? We can wait for Dr. Taiwo. And the first question that I have, which I attempted to answer, and I think Karthik, you would be best placed to answer this. It's from Hikari from the United Kingdom, who asks, when you were selecting the indicators, you said that the choice was made based on feasibility and importance. My question is, what determines the degree of importance of each of these indicators? Are there any criteria set for importance?
Thanks, Bush. I think you answered it in a comprehensive way. But just to add, so as Bidisha mentioned, so we had two parameters. One was level of importance. So for that, the participants have to, every indicator they have to assess, like how much is relevant to understand. So we had 3-4 main outcomes, right? So one was women economic empowerment. So like how relevant that indicator to understand, like the women economic empowerment, and also whether the indicator is also relevant to understand the enterprise growth and their health also. So that's for the level of importance. For the feasibility aspect, so we've made clear to the participants that, okay, look, so these indicators, you are going to collect it from the field. Like you assume that, there's an indicator and you are the program implementer, you're going to collect this data from the field using your field coordinators. So you have to understand how feasible it would be for you to collect the data. To give an example, let's say in our theory, one of the outcome was increased participation of women in entrepreneurial activities. That is the outcome. And one of the indicator under that was number of hours spent by women on household chores or care work. So that was one of the indicators that was proposed in our exercise. Now, the implementers to assess whether they will be able to collect this data using their own program team. So if I am an implementer, I will see whether my field coordinator or the field team will be able to go reach to these women beneficiaries and do a time use survey, because for this we need a detailed time use survey. For the indicator to be very comprehensive, we need a hour by hour how the woman is spending time, and do this survey. So now as implementer, I will evaluate whether it's really feasible for me, because I have already a large set of responsibilities for the implementation work. So I will just assess based on that whether this indicator is really feasible for me in terms of time and effort. So this is how we have asked them to assess. And once they've given their inputs, as Bisha mentioned, so after the sessions, so we had like 3A team and lead team had a like detailed like meeting discussing each of these indicators in terms of existing evidence also, right? For example, not we just didn't take the inputs from the implementing, we also looked at the existing evidence, like how each indicator is directly level of evidence we have for each indicator affecting the, let's say, women economic empowerment or entrepreneurial growth. So I think I've answered that question. I hope.
Thanks, Karthik. I think Vidisha actually is facing a power cut at the moment, but she's asked me to step in while she's getting back up. I think some of the other questions that have come in on the chat, I'll just quickly read out. I mean, there's another question from Ishita, and actually, I think there are two people asking this question, Ishita and Adita Tripathi. They're asking if we also looked at power relations within the collective in terms of composition of members, how the board of directors was selected, and collection of produce, to name a few aspects. So I think even here, Karthik, I will have to defer to you here. So do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we kept the monitoring indicators to the minimum as possible. So these were not part of a monitoring framework. But what do we have currently? We have the formative evaluation going on for the 4 one-year projects. So lead team, our team, my colleagues are currently doing the qualitative evaluation of this project. So in that these so we have separate FGDs with WC members. So we have just separate FGDs with women beneficiaries. We also have separate FGDs with women in the area who are not part of the program, to understand their inputs also. So all the aspects that you mentioned, to be frank, right, these are not something that we want through monitoring data. But as part of evaluation, we are collecting this data, and I think hopefully within a month or two we'll have results from our pilot evaluations.
Thank you, Karthik. And I think the last question that we will take is, we have answered quite a few questions on the chat itself. Yeah, there is one outstanding question, which is, and I invite anyone to respond to it. Most indicators on women's economic empowerment are captured in a quantitative way. How do women's understanding of their economic empowerment vary from these quantitative, quantitative measures? Madhu and Tara, would you reflect on what you have learned from your work in the community on the relevance of these standard tools, standardized tools and for collecting women's empowerment? How have those panned out in the field, and what, if you have noticed any deviations from what kind of questions are asked in these?
Tara, would you like to go first?
Go ahead, Madhu. Go ahead.
So I think, we have one example of, using the WEA index. Women's empowerment in agriculture, which, is typically an outcome kind of an indicator, not very easy to, again, collect. Again, so again, in its original form, it tends to be a very long process of, and mostly, determined from outside, and because it's a global, index, you can't do too much in terms of, for comparison purposes. But, one of our teams in Orissa had kind of made she kind of worked on actually simplifying some of the, areas of inquiry to a kind of a day-to-day context of within women's lives. So, and she converted it into, a pictorial kind of a tool which, women could use in capturing, complex things like, resource availability, leisure time, and, agency, etc., into things which, women could relate to in a more day-to-day-ish manner. And, therefore, using that to trigger conversations within the women themselves, and and therefore to also act as a nudge for horizontal learning processes to kick in. So that is again, that is one this thing that I remember. Of course, in in RLM, there is and other examples of actually using things like various things like using incomes data to also trigger why these differences across things like crop productivity and resources data, and how, so things like that. I think all have experiences about. Yeah, I'll stop here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my experience, would say that partially these the kind of indicators that the project has used partially would tell us, the transition, the transformation in a women's understanding of herself, and again the reality in which the kind of a representational knowledge is that we say, like she starts understanding what is the situation in which she and her sort of peers live. So that's very important, I think, and that kind of representational knowledge is very significant for critical appreciation of one's life situation and things like that. But perhaps it doesn't say everything. It cannot say everything, because beyond the economic parameters, there are other, as we know, the other social cultural sort of bondages which women have to deal with. But what I have found in the case of this pilot project is that, and let me tell you that question about women spending time, etc. I think women have now, as a result of their increased involvement in enterprise and other kinds of community activities, they're actually spending much more time than any average woman of their, their age and life stage would be spending. Because in fact, sometimes and I have actually a question included in the board of governors, the board of directors sort of interview schedule I prepared as to, how much time you spend on the activities related to this organization. I think I was wondering, where do they have the time to do anything? So there is definitely an increased self-exploitation of this empowered women, which I think we should recognize. And I think that's a different debate altogether. But that is definitely, they're doing it with great involvement and without complaining. They derive tremendous self-satisfaction with the fact that they're able to kind of do both. They are able to manage the household and also manage the rest of the things. Is something which they are proud of. But I think that definitely depletes their well-being, physical well-being in certain ways. I think we must definitely address that as a great dilemma that development brings in. I think that's one part of the point. Otherwise, if your question is about how do we how much of empowerment are we able to capture through these indicators, my response would be that we actually would be able to at least capture the economic aspect of the power over things from this. But that's not all. There are other things which we should aspire to. So that's how I answer that.
Thank you so much, Tara. And we are out of time now. So I want to wrap up by just thanking Madhu, Karthik, and Tara for your participation, for the great discussion. I want to thank the 3IE and the lead team who have put this together and who have been working very hard in the background. We have only done the talking, but they have done the entire setting things up, getting sure the message is out there. I also thank all the participants for your time, and I hope that you found this discussion very fruitful. You can find our contact details. Kirti has put them up on the chat, and I really hope that we can be in touch about this. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's really nice. Thanks a lot.